Hello there. Today I'm here to talk to you about some books about messed up lesbians. I recently read Private Rights by Julia Armfield and I thought, I need more of that. I need some more of that. If you want my thoughts on that, you're going to have to go to the Patreon. I'm sorry, but for today, we're going to read these four books. Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson, A Good Happy Girl by Marissa Higgins, Dykette by Jenny Fran Davis, and Sedating Elaine by Dawn Winter. Dawn Winter, singular. So I'm pumped about this. All of these books look really good to me and I'm excited to read them. I'm not 100% sure what I'm looking for in this video. Part of me just wants like messed up, fucked up women doing fucked up shit that just happen to be lesbians. But then also part of me does want an exploration of like the societal impact of being a queer woman. Like how that affects who you are and how that in itself messes you up. I do kind of want some commentary on that. But I'm not going to read Stone Butch Blues again because you will never see me again. If I pick up that book, and if any of you are friends with me on Goodreads and you ever see me mark Stone Butch Blues as reading, call the police. I need a welfare check. Okay, that's really all I have to say right now. I am going to go start. I'm going to start with the tiniest little one right here, Bloom. I'll see you then. Okay, y'all, we have started with a fucking stinker. This is truly one of the most frustrating books I've ever read in my entire life. I am so thrilled, so excited to rant about it. It was so terrible. I could not stop hate reading this fucking book. If you liked this book, click off the video. I am going to literally rip it to shreds. I am going to tear this shit apart. It's going to make you question everything you thought you knew if you enjoyed this book. Actually, maybe stay here. Maybe you need to think some things through. Reflect on something because this was dog water. So there will be some spoilers here, but I'm trying my best not to talk about books for like 20-30 minutes because my videos are getting too long and honestly it's getting boring to edit them and I think it's also boring to watch. So I'm going to talk about what happens in this book. There will be spoilers. You should skip them if you don't want to see them, but also do not read this. But I'm going to try my best not to talk too much. Not to talk too much about what happens in the book because right now I'm making videos where I talk for 20 minutes about what happens in a book and then 3 minutes about what I think about the book, and I feel like I'm not adding anything to the conversation. You know what I mean? So Bloom is a horror novella about two women who fall in love with each other, and the tagline is "When sweet romance turns deadly." Should I have known based off of that how terrible this book was going to be? Probably. And yet, I persevered. This begins with pure, straightforward exposition into Rosemary, nicknamed Ro, and her life and how she's ended up where she is. Her partner, I don't think husband, but like long-term boyfriend, had cheated on her. And so she moved away from New York City, the Big Apple, and she went kind of closer to where she's from, like down south, to teach as an assistant professor. She hasn't met anyone in the past couple of months, living a pretty isolated life. And then one day she goes to the farmer's market and she meets the most beautiful woman she's ever seen in her life. This whimsical, like almost fairy-like woman named Ash who sells soaps and cupcakes and pottery and plants. So I do want to say here that Ro is maybe the most insufferable character that I have ever read. Now, I don't think that we should always be assuming that authors are inserting themselves into their work, and I know it's a problem to assume that women can only write what they know, and that has been a problem for like 300 years. And yet, it's hard not to see Ro as some sort of self-insert when she is a writer. And also when she's cringe in the way the author's fucking author bio is. There feels to be there's a lot of similarities between the author and Ro, and it doesn't seem like there is an intention for the reader to understand Ro as an insufferable character. I think we're supposed to like her. I think we're supposed to empathize with her and understand her. I wanted to bash my head into the wall. I wanted to hang myself. No word of a lie. The line, "She understands books more than she understands people," is in this book within the first like 20 pages. I read that and I was like, oh, I'm gonna hate this. I'm gonna hate this so fucking much. And I did. Actually, Ro only got worse. This whole words are my world thing, so fucking insufferable. The way she would speak, it's like she had this like huge vocabulary but like didn't speak like a human being. Like she spoke like the most insufferable, pompous, self-important douchebag you've ever heard. Like, one of the first sentences she says, she goes to Ash's little farmer's market stall and she tries one of the cupcakes and she says, "That's unctuous." Like, I need to scream into a pillow. Like, actually, it's making me so mad just thinking about it. Another line telling us about Ro's fucking irritating character. "People are difficult. They don't always tell the truth, much less know the truth. But books are honest." I need to, like, take a deep breath. I need to calm down. So Ro meets Ash at this farmer's market, and she becomes all-consumingly obsessed with her. Ash is a little bit closed off, a little bit distant, but she does show a lot of kindness to Ro. It's obvious the feelings are reciprocated. After a few weeks of Ro going to this farmer's market every single Saturday without fail to see Ash and to buy her cupcakes, Ash says, "Why don't you come over to my place? I have some more plants there. You can pick out a plant." Ro goes over. They have a lovely little lunch, and then she says, "Can I use the restroom?" And she's like, oh my god, she's so fucking annoying. She's like, "I've been hurt once before, and I got cheated on, so that means I'm fully justified in snooping around Ash's house." So she does. She opens the bedroom door, she opens the guest room door, and then right when she's about to open the last door in the hallway, Ash appears and is rightfully and justifiably upset with her. Ash says, "I'm a really private person and I have boundaries that I need you to respect, and I thought better of you. I didn't think that you would snoop like this." Ro is like, "You know what? I'm going to put it all out on the table. I wanted to make sure that you weren't seeing anybody else, that it was just exclusive between the two of us, because my boyfriend cheated on me, and that means I'm allowed to behave however I want." And then it's all forgiven, and they kiss, and it's like the most magical experience in the world. Something important about Ro's character is that she has always thought of herself as straight and never really explored women. There's not a clear indication of Ro's sexuality in this book. Is she bi? Has she just discovered she's a lesbian? I don't know. But the book does fit in with the theme. Don't get started with me, because Ash is a lesbian, okay? And oh my god, is Ash also messed up? But we'll get to that. That's kind of the twist. The most predictable twist ever, but it is the twist. So the two of them start a lovely relationship. Ash loves to make things for Ro and to watch her eat things and enjoy things. And Ro is like just obsessed with Ash. It's all she can think about. Like, they see each other like once a week, and as the reader, you're only getting information when they're seeing each other. There's like maybe a sentence or two that's like, Ro went and taught her classes and thought about Ash the whole time, but it's like just very minutely detailing everything that happens between the two of them and nothing in between. Now, Ro's obsessed with Ash, but she also can't stop thinking about this door that Ash was so protective of. This is a major plot hole to me, because what do you mean Ash was so protective of this door? No, that was just the moment that you got caught snooping. Hello? It makes no sense. And Ro keeps being like, "Well, I wonder what's behind that door. I mean, I'm just curious about what's wrong with curiosity? I'm just curious." One time the two of them are having dinner on Ash's farm, and then a raccoon appears, and Ash beats this raccoon to death with a shovel. We also get to see this darker side of Ash when they go on a hike in the woods, and they're making out with each other, and they look up and see this man who's clearly trying to hide himself and also recording them. And Ash chases him down, takes his phone, deletes everything off of it, cracks it in half, throws it in the river, and then also takes his keys and throws them in the river. Then they go back on their hike, and when they leave the hike, they've come in separate cars. Ash stays in the parking lot, and Ro's like, "Oh, I don't know. I feel weird leaving her here, because the guy is there. He's just sitting in his car. He can't drive away." So she's like, "I'm just going to go back and see if she's okay." She goes back, and Ash is like, "I don't want you to mother me. Like, please don't nag me, leave me alone. I can take care of myself." The two of them are supposed to meet for dinner that night, and Ro shows up at Ash's house, and Ash isn't there. And then she says, "Don't worry about it. I just lost my keys on our hike, and I had to go all the way back up, and I'm just getting home now." After a while of them dating, the two of them get into a pretty huge fight at the farmer's market. Ro goes to see her, and she feels a little pang of jealousy when she sees that Ash is talking to a man trying to sell him things. Ash has made it clear that she's only into women. I just think that this thing of like, I had a boyfriend who cheated on me, so I can be just as shitty as I want, and it's fine, is so tired, so overdone at this point. It's fucking ridiculous. They end up getting into this huge fight because Ro comes over, and she's like all giddy and giggly and like, "Oh my god, hi Ash." And Ash is like, cold to her, like, "Hey, I'm working with a customer. I'll see you in a minute, ma'am." The two of them fight, and it's so clear to me that Ro is in the wrong and is treated like she's in the right by the text. She keeps pushing Ash's boundaries that have been very clearly set, and Ash keeps saying, that doesn't work for me. I need you to respect my boundaries, and getting rightfully upset with her. And then Ro will be like, well, that's just what normal couples do. Hello? What happened to these being queer women? Like, we're just going to do what normal couples do? Fucking ridiculous. Don't even get me started. I'm going to get started on this. I just need to get through this plot before I can start complaining. The two of them do end up making up with each other, and the night of their makeup sex, the power goes out, and Ash is like, I'll deal with it in the morning. Let's just go back to sleep. Ro's like, I can't sleep with the still air. I need the air conditioning to be on. So she goes to look for the breaker. She goes downstairs, which is what was behind this door that Ash was so protective of. When she gets there, she sees the breaker, and there's also a door on either side of her. And she's like, there's nothing wrong with being a little bit curious. Like, we're dating. I want to know everything about her. It's fine for me to yet again push her boundaries. She opens the door, and what does she find but, like, basically a medical exam table with this man who had harassed them on the hike on it with his legs cut off. He's alive, but he's, like, gagged. And she's like, oh, Ash is a serial killer. Oh my god, that's crazy. So then she goes into the other door, and she finds all of the supplies that Ash uses to make the stuff she sells at the farmer's market. And Ro's like, oh my god, she's using human flesh to make, like, soaps and cupcakes and pottery and stuff. I can tell you this is not a shock. This is exactly what you know is going to happen in this book, and it's actually really frustrating because it's so predictable, and then it explains it 3 times. Like, it shows you what has happened, Ro interprets it, and then Ash comes down and Ash tells her everything. You're like, I know. I got it like 50 pages ago. There's a little bit of a chase, but Ro does not escape, and the book ends with a kind of epilogue where Ro is living at Ash's house with her legs chopped off, unable to leave, unable to fend for herself, and still in this kind of like false, like fake relationship with Ash. So my thoughts on this book are entirely negative. I hated this book, and I actually thought it was fucking terrible. Typically when I hate a book, it's because the writing is really, really bad. I'm not saying the writing was good. There were certainly issues. Like this, oh my god, the way Ro is written as a character and like the vocabulary that's used. For example, every single time she eats one of Ash's cupcakes, she luxuriates in it. And she rolls it around in her mouth. And she eats one of Ash's cupcakes like once every 5 fucking pages, and it's always the same language used to describe it. There's also an abundance of ellipses that felt ridiculously overused, and this tendency to go, but ... well, which is so like almost startling when you read it. Like, it really disrupts the flow of your reading. But it isn't the writing that made me think this was one of the worst books that I had ever read and made me hate read it with this kind of like voracious appetite. It's the ideas that this author has and that she imbues into the text that are just so fucked up. Like the things that Ro and Ash are fighting about, and the way the text tells us that Ro is supposed to be perceived, like we're supposed to think she's in the right, and that Ash is being too harsh or too cruel, is fucking bonkers. And it's also bonkers that the text will lay things out for you, tell you what happens, and then tell you how you are supposed to interpret it, and the interpretation that it gives you is wrong. I have examples. After Ro has seen everything that Ash really is, it gives us all of the red flags that Ro had ignored because Ash was just a girl, an ethereally beautiful girl in a snowy white dress who loves flowers and old-fashioned things. Okay, first of all, not first of all. I will get into the fucking gender issues in this book later, but let's talk about the red flags that we're supposed to have seen. First one being that Ash calls her Rosemary even though Ro told her that she doesn't like that. That's irritating because Ro has pushed every single one of Ash's incredibly clear boundaries. But whatever, that's fair enough. Ash gets mad at her for any public display of affection. Demonstrably not true at all. She makes out with her all the time. They hold hands. It's this one situation where Ro comes to the farmer's market and tries to be all lovey-dovey with her while she is with what is going to be a really big customer for her, that Ash responds with upset. I also think that this is really ridiculous coming from a woman who is just now exploring her sexuality, who is in a relationship with a woman who has lived her life as a lesbian in the South. Like, yeah, maybe a public display of affection is not always safe, Ro, you fucking asshole, you fucking stupid. stupid idiot. Ash punishes Ro every time she shows normal human curiosity in a way that Ash finds threatening. Okay, so again, no, it's not normal human curiosity to snoop through someone's house, particularly when they have asked you many times not to do that. You are allowed to have boundaries, even if they're boundaries that are not normal. Like, that's okay. And if that's a deal breaker for you, Ro, then leave. Fuck. Every time there is tension between the two of them, the book tells us that we're supposed to be on Ro's side, or maybe we're supposed to be neutral. And it tells us this by saying Ash is being abnormal. And yes, sometimes she is. She is a very private person. She has really hard, strong boundaries. And yet, she has set these boundaries, and you have crossed them over and over and over again. I'm not ever going to be on your side. Even if it's not normal, even if you're the one who's behaving like a normal human person, having normal curiosity, I'm still gonna think that you are in the wrong for pushing boundaries. And I think that it is so frustrating that this book is supposed to be about a queer couple and there's no queerness allowed from Ro. Maybe that could have been an interesting exploration because she is supposed to be just discovering her sexuality, but it's so annoying that she's like, I want to just do things that normal couples do. Where's the queerness? Where's the fucking queerness? I'm tired. I'm so tired. And I was reading this. This is a little bit problematic, and I'm sorry to say it, but I was reading this and I was thinking to myself, this really feels like it was written by a straight woman. Like, this is not this is not queer. This is not a queer book. There's no queerness in here other than the fact that the two leads happen to be women. And I was like, no, that's problematic. Like, I can't think that, because if it's written by a queer woman and I'm thinking she's written it like a straight woman. I did end up looking it up, and I did find a blog post where Delilah S. Dawson does say that she is a cishet white woman, and she also in that blog post kind of pats herself on the back for writing diverse characters, even though she herself is not diverse. So I want to be clear. I don't think that straight women can't write queer stories, and I don't want to say that. I really, truly do not believe that. And I'm not the arbiter of who can write whose stories. However, I find it often very hard to care what straight people have to say about queerness. I think it can be done well. Not by her. Like, literally never again. I also developed this opinion reading this book that I think that if straight women want to write queer romances, then they have to have gay sex. Because this is so irritating. Not that I would want to read Delilah S. Dawson's, like, ridiculously verbose fucking sex scenes. She didn't write them, though. And it felt to me like it was cowardly. Like, we get every single detail of every interaction between these women. That's the whole book. And then when they have sex, it goes, and then ... Later that night, lying in the aftermath. No, you need to commit to the fucking bit. If you are going to write a queer romance, have gay sex, and then write accurate gay sex. I hated that. I thought it was annoying. Like, I kind of already got into, I found Ro to be the most insufferable character of all time, and not in a fun way that felt deliberate. I think that it was a self-insert. I'm sorry, I really do. And I thought that she was so intellectually elitist, so fucking irritating with, I understand books more than I understand people. Like, I genuinely, what if I just killed myself? Actually, what if I fucking killed myself? I just need someone to take the thesaurus away from Delilah S. Dawson. Listen to this. That felt like, this is after a kiss, by the way. That felt like champagne, Rose says wonderingly. Effervescent and ephemeral. If someone said that to me after we kissed, I genuinely think I would punch them in the teeth. And then I think that this also created quite a lot of dissonance with the narrative voice being so casual. I found the narrative voice to feel like it was coming from a woman. I'm sorry, this is like fully a character assassination at this point, but I feel like it was coming from a woman who is like very online in a very specific, like, no offense to anyone, but like 40-year-old kind of way. And like I feel like she was on Facebook. And I feel like she was trying not to sound like someone who was really online. And that made the narrative voice very casual, which contrasted against Ro's, like, elitist, overly large vocabulary. Like, at one point it says, Ash was a straight up killer. Hello? Because it was written by a straight woman, of course, it's not that interesting of an exploration of someone who is later in life discovering their sexual identity. I think that there is such a tight focus on gender in this book, and it felt to me like it was a very gender essentialist the whole time. Like, there are inherent differences between men and women, and I am going to talk about them, and that is how I view the world. Super clear. And then it literally said verbatim that women are more sensitive than men. Hello? What are we doing? What are we doing with this book? It felt like she couldn't stop centering men and the perception of men and comparing and contrasting dating women and dating men in a way that did not feel authentically queer. Even, later in life discovering sexuality authentically queer. It was straight. It was so straight. It was wild to me how pretentious this book was for being so poorly done and so riddled with retrograde ideas that I don't want to be exposed to in my fiction from 2022. Like this dumbass messaging of women can be evil too. I would recommend this book to someone who is looking to hate read something and be incredibly frustrated and annoyed the entire time, but also unable to put it down because you just know there's going to be more things that you're going to fucking hate that's going to make you roll your eyes, want to throw the book at the goddamn wall. That's why I would recommend this too. It's so bad. I'm sorry. It's so fucking bad. The next book I'm going to be reading is Sedating Elaine by Dawn Winter. I'm partway through it, maybe 50 pages into it, and I already know it's going to be fucking better than that. It would be difficult to be worse than Bloom. Thank you for listening to me rant about it. I will see you when I'm done this. Bye. Hello there. I'm here to talk to you about Sedating Elaine by Dawn Winter, a novel about a woman who's reeling in the aftermath of her most recent breakup, who starts dating a new woman who's really irritating, and she ends up sedating this new girlfriend so that she can stop being annoyed by her and can take her money because she owes a lot of money to a drug dealer. Spoilers will begin now as I get into a more detailed summary of what happens in this book. So at the center of this book is this couple, Frances, who is depressed and anxious and lonely and isolates herself and cannot express her own desires and needs and wants, even though she feels them very strongly. And we have her new-ish girlfriend, they've been dating about 3 months, named Elaine. Elaine is hyperactive and she's loud and she's needy and she's just so optimistic and enthusiastic about everything. And Elaine refuses to see past her own desires to see other people's needs. Frances is giving her a lot of messages that this is not working for Frances, and Elaine is just completely blind to them because she's absolutely in love with Frances. And Frances finds this absolutely tedious, both Elaine's personality and what Elaine feels for Frances, but Frances cannot speak her mind, even though she keeps trying to. She keeps trying to break up with Elaine, and then the conversation just always gets away from her, and she can't break up with Elaine at the point that the story begins because she owes $2,000 to a drug dealer. Frances has no friends and no family and is completely alone and living paycheck to paycheck, where Elaine comes from quite a lot of money, lives on an estate kind of money. They're British. The drug dealer has started to threaten Frances with having one of his little cronies come and beat her up. It's very dramatic, very theatrical, especially because she is truly just buying weed from him. But regardless, she feels physically threatened. And so she realizes that what she has to do is invite Elaine to come move in with her so she can get rent money from Elaine and use this to pay back the dealer. She has a week to get $2,000. She has no money whatsoever, $70 in her bank account. And Elaine, of course, is ecstatic over being invited to move in, and she moves in pretty much instantly, as if all her stuff was already packed and ready to go. So this book is a lot of rambling and a lot of flashbacks to the past, which I think can definitely be boring to some people, but I was really interested in Frances's character and where she comes from, and it alludes to all of these things that it gives you little pieces of throughout the book, so I think that definitely gives it a bit of a push. We know that Frances is totally caught up in grieving her previous relationship with a woman named Adrian. Now, Frances feels abandoned by basically everyone in her life. Her mom left when she was very young. Her dad died when she was about 19 and they never had a close relationship. She always sees herself as kind of the victim and the person who is left by everyone around her. So when Adrian broke up with her a few months before the story starts, it completely devastated her life, and she started getting into all of these new relationships, just kind of trying to numb the pain. And she also used substances to numb the pain. She definitely has a problem with alcohol and with weed. A lot of this book is Frances thinking back on what she feels about Elaine, how she feels about the breakup, how she feels about herself in the breakup, and the story of their relationship. We learn like about halfway through the book that Frances and Adrian's relationship actually started with Frances being a total creep. She had seen Adrian one day and thought, oh my god, this woman looks exactly like the fake mother I had created as a baby. When she was a kid, she had an imaginary friend, Mom, and Adrian is like the spitting image of this imaginary friend. And Frances is like, oh my god, this is a sign. And she ends up following Adrian around for quite a while, following her actually all the way back to her apartment, which is just across the pond from Frances's apartment. And Frances stalks Adrian for like a couple of weeks, hanging out outside of her apartment, watching her come and go, waiting for her for a long time until she finally strikes up a conversation with her. And actually, Adrian strikes up a conversation with Frances. And this is so interesting to compare how detached Frances is now in her current relationship. It shows you that she has the capacity to be so intensely loving in the way Elaine is to her, and she just does not extend it to Elaine. And the more we learn about Frances, the more we can see that she is more overbearing than Elaine is. And Elaine, reading it, like, she is, like, she's kind of harmless. In some ways, she does feel pretty shitty, like with her constant sex drive. She doesn't really care if Frances is in the mood or not, and that can suck. But in a lot of ways, Elaine is like a positive and happy and loving person that Frances is just horrible to. And in Frances and Adrian's relationship, Frances is like Elaine, but like turned up even more than you could expect a person to be. So in the present day, Elaine has moved in with Frances, and it is way too much. Frances is escaping the house every chance she can get, and it's about 48 hours of living together before Frances is like, I'm going to blow my brains out if I have to keep doing this. And she thinks, I could just get some drugs from that drug dealer who I owe $2,000 to, and I could sedate her. She thinks if she was just asleep all the time, everything would be fine. And so she does manage to convince this drug dealer, Dom, to give her some drugs, and she drugs Elaine's coffee with the intention of knocking her out for about 3 days, until Saturday, which is the day that Elaine has set up a money transfer to go into Frances's account, and the day that Dom has said, you have to pay me back or I will send someone to come torture you. The morning that Frances drugs Elaine is really intense with this unanticipatable series of events. Frances is not 100% sure if she has given Elaine too high of a dose or not enough of a dose. She doesn't know how long it's going to take. It's like literally just this random vial of drug that her drug dealer said, just give her a couple drops and be careful with it. It's a really strong drug. So it starts with the worry of like, is Elaine even going to drink her coffee? Because it's this very, very swelteringly hot morning, like one of those first hot mornings of summer that this happens. She does end up drinking the coffee while Frances is just kind of sitting there twitching. And then she goes, let's go for a run. I'm feeling so excited. Frances hates running with Elaine. She used to like running with Adrian, but she won't do it with Elaine. But she's like, she's gonna fucking pass out. I have to follow this woman. They go on this run. It really shows us Elaine's personality, which is great because after this, Elaine is sedated for the rest of the book. And this definitely shows us how annoying Elaine can be. It gives you a sense of what Frances is feeling. A lot of the things that Frances absolutely hates about Elaine are totally harmless and actually like even worse than that. Like, they're often like really positive qualities that Frances has such a problem with, but you go on this run with them and Elaine like goes to a park and she starts swinging on the monkey bars and being like so over the top, like childish and like full of whimsy in what kind of feels like a forced way, or if it's not a forced way, it feels like in a way that is so blind to the people around her. Like, children are trying to play on this playground and they're just kind of like standing there watching this woman go across the monkey bars over and over again. There's signs that say no adults or children over 10 on the playground, and Elaine is just like so joyous and so just full of childlike whimsy that she's like, let's play on the swings kind of thing. And when you're depressed like Frances is and you're hopeless like Frances is, it is hard to be around someone like that, and you feel it during this run. Elaine ends up shooting off ahead of Frances and they lose each other, and Frances is like, oh my god, she's gonna fucking crash. She's going to end up in the hospital. There's going to be blood tests. I'm going to prison. Frances makes it back to their apartment, and Elaine is there, and she has crashed. She's been brought there by this really nice couple who basically had to carry her into their car and then carry her up the stairs into the apartment, and she's very sick. And they're like, oh, it's probably food poisoning. And Frances is playing the part of being like a caretaker and being a good girlfriend. And Elaine slowly but surely falls deeply into her sedation. Oftentimes, Frances is like, I fucking killed her. I think she's dead. Like, she's not breathing. Oh my God, what do I do? Frances is kind of free to do whatever she wants now. She doesn't have to deal with Elaine's personality. And mostly what she does is just go to work. But then Elaine's horrible posh mom keeps showing up. She is like comically an annoying, pompous British woman. And mother. Like, she's like, oh my God, my little baby, my little angel. She's so irritating. It's awesome. She shows up unannounced, pushes her way into the house, and she's like, oh my God, what a dump you're living in. She's so incredibly judgmental. She goes to Elaine, and Elaine is just like, oh, I have food poisoning, kind of slipping in and out of consciousness. And it's concerning, but it's not like, it doesn't ring like alarm bells in the way that Frances's personality and the dirtiness of their house does. Saturday finally comes, the day that Elaine has to pay Dom back, and she goes to take money out from her bank account, and there's no money in there. So she goes back to the apartment, and she tries very hard to wake Elaine up, and she can't. Elaine is like sedated into a coma, and then she's finally able to, and I mean, like, kind of. Elaine is sort of awake, and she goes, go to my bag, go to the desk drawer somewhere, get a bag from in there, and open it up. And there's an engagement ring. She is, in her half-conscious way, proposing to Frances. But there's no money, and Frances can't wake Elaine up enough to figure out the money with her. She tears through the whole entire apartment. She rips through things, trying to find bank statements, some way to access Elaine's money, which she knows Elaine has a lot of, and she just can't. So she ends up going to work, and Dom shows up at her work, threatens her again, and then her boss kind of like shoos him away, but she knows she's screwed. Near-ish to the end of the book, she's walking down the street and she sees this woman that works for Dom, Betty, and she's like, oh my God, she's on the way to my apartment right now to torture the money out of me. Betty is kind of like this mystical figure, this kind of like there's a myth of Betty where she will use a curling iron in orifices to torture people into giving up money that is owed to Dom. Betty's known to be like incredibly sadistic and unhinged, and she sees on the bus, she looks out and she sees Frances, and she starts chasing her down, and Frances gets onto a train, manages to get there without Betty following her on, and she goes to the seaside, which is somewhere that she's talked about going a lot in this book. It's somewhere that she used to go with Adrian and then went a lot of times after her and Adrian broke up, kind of like playing the part of this woman grieving a relationship, like with her hair messed up at the seaside, like drowning in her own grief. She ends up falling asleep on this beach that is kind of cornered in with the staircase that leads down to it and a cliff. And the tide comes in while she's asleep, and it means that she has to go out into the water and then swim back and go up the stairs. And so she's fucking drenched. People help her. It's like actually kind of a nice moment, but she has to wear this like horrible, shapeless, bright pink dress with a sequined palm tree on the back of it that someone has bought at a gift shop for her because her clothes are soaked. And then her boss calls and he says, what are you doing? Your shift started half an hour ago. And so she has to train all the way back. She's like 3 hours late for work, and she doesn't go back to the apartment, which she hasn't been back to the apartment in like quite a long time now. She's just completely left Elaine on her own. The last time she was in there, Elaine was like not able to make it to the bathroom by herself, was going to the bathroom in the bed, and Frances had to like change the sheets and stuff like that. So Elaine is left alone, and as the reader, you're definitely concerned about Elaine, and then you're concerned about Frances because she shows up to work in this horrible dress. She works in a kitchen, and her boss is like, you can't work in a kitchen looking like this. Like, you need to be in proper clothing. And he's like, don't worry, you can go upstairs and work with the waitresses. And Frances is like, you cannot make me do that in this state. Like, her hair is salt soaked and sopping wet and scraggly. She's wearing, again, this like absolutely horrible dress. She's obviously like a complete disaster. And he's like, nah, kid, you gotta go up. We need all hands on deck. And she goes up there, and she's, of course, so incredibly stressed about being perceived by people in this state. And then who is there at a table but fucking Adrian. Without really knowing that she's doing it, she kind of just goes straight over to Adrian's table in this horrible state. Adrian is like laughing with friends. She's a very put together woman, and that's how she's been portrayed through the whole book. And she is kind of shocked at Francis's appearance, and they have this kind of argument, but not really. Francis sort of just ends up walking away from her. But then one of the people at Adrian's table, one of her friends, comes over to Francis, who's standing at like the waitressing station, and he talks to her about Adrian. And he talks to her about how Adrian uses people and how she makes people feel so special. And they, even if they can recognize that that's what she's doing, they can't get enough of it. They can't get enough of her. And he can see that that's how she feels about Adrian. And he also tells her that Adrian and one of the other men that she's sitting at the table with had been having a relationship for the past like 7 years throughout the relationship that Francis and Adrian had entirely. And this kind of neatly wraps up Francis's grief over her relationship with Adrian. She realizes that Adrian is like this, and it wasn't a problem with her. And she sees Adrian for who she really is. She's no longer committed to this picture of Adrian as like wholly positive. She does end up running out of her work because this is kind of a heartbreaking reality to face, and she goes to this little pond that she's visited many times in the book, and she starts sobbing there. And then a guy who's there is like, "Are you okay?" And he comes and sits over beside her, and he's staring like really intently at her lips, and she can't help but then stare intently at his lips. And when I was reading this, I was thinking that this man was assaulting her, but he isn't. She is really into it. She's thinking, I just need to be loved. Do you hear that loud truck outside? Jesus Christ. She's thinking, I just need to be loved. All I need is love and care right now, which is all Elaine had ever given her. So her and this guy are consensually making out, and then all of a sudden she hears her own name, and she looks up, and who is standing there but Elaine? And Elaine runs, and Francis makes it back to the apartment. Obviously, the drugs have worn off, and Elaine is there, and she's like shattering this wooden box of paraphernalia that Francis had kept from her relationship with Adrian. And Elaine gets this moment to blow up and like really fight back against the mistreatment that she's faced from Francis through this entire book, that part of you thinks she hasn't even recognized Francis is doing, but now you know that she was just being positive through Francis's kind of like emotional abuse. Elaine is screaming and she's crying and she's saying, "You think I didn't know about this box? You think I didn't know that everything was about Adrian, that every time we had sex you saw Adrian, that every time that you told me you loved me you were telling it to Adrian?" And then she's like, "Who was that guy? What was that?" And Francis says, "It wasn't about you." And Elaine is like, "It never is. It never fucking is about me. It's always about you." But in the middle of this fight, who shows up but the very expected Dom and Betty, who come in and restrain both women, and they start to threaten the torture. And Elaine is like, what the fuck is going on? She has no idea about any of this, of course. And they're like, Francis owes $2,000. And Elaine says, "I have $2,000. Like, let me just go get it." And she goes into the room and she gets this Furby that Francis had hated, and she takes the head off, and there's just wads of cash in there. She gives them $2,000 and they leave. And she's like, "Francis, you could have just told me. If that's what this was all about, it was just money. You just needed to ask. I would have given it to you." And Francis decides in this moment to tell Elaine the whole truth about everything. We don't get their conversation, just that decision has been made, and then it cuts to a kind of epilogue chapter, which happens months after this conversation. And in this chapter, Elaine and Francis are at the seaside. They're there together following a note that Francis's father had given her on his deathbed that had the address and phone number of her mother. Francis kind of reflects on the conversation that they had had and says that Elaine had been shocked, but unsurprisingly, she had been incredibly forgiving over what had happened. The two of them are no longer together as a couple, but they are very good friends, and Elaine has taken her here so that she can meet her mom. And that's how the book ends, with Francis meeting her mom. And I kind of loved this so much. When she first sees her on the street, she thinks, it's not Adrian's face. It's not the face of the woman I had imagined in my childhood. It's my own face. I think that is lovely. And though it was kind of annoying how perfect and neat this ending is, like every loose end is tied up, everything is wrapped up so beautifully in this book, it was moving. This book does have plot, but it's mostly a character study, and I think the characterization in it was done really well. I was very interested in Francis and in the way she became who she was. I've left out a lot of her past in this summary, but there is so much that has happened to her and things that she has thought that she has done and just the way she perceives her own past is really kind of messed up, and she thinks of herself as a worse person than she really is. And then in the present day, her behaviors align with that idea of herself as really bad. But at the same time, she's committed to this idea of herself as the victim and as the abandoned and as the person that everyone leaves. And she justifies everyone leaving her by thinking of herself as this bad person who has done really bad things. I thought it was interesting how each moment of her life is marked by this inaction. She doesn't do what she needs to do to get to a point where her life is better. She has no concept of improving her own situation, and she just kind of lets things happen to her, not just with Elaine, but with everyone. And I feel like her life is very lateral. She's never going anywhere. It's all the same forever. Until the very end, when she makes this choice that changes everything for her and helps her begin to sort through her traumatic childhood. And I liked how much growth we got to see with Frances. Though she can be horrible and she makes really bad choices that hurt other people, it's hard not to feel some sense of warmth towards her. I think that this book is really good at making you feel a complex array of emotions about its characters. And I loved how this book slowly reveals its characters to us. I feel like at the beginning you get a pretty good sense at about 50 pages in of who these people are, but then it keeps telling you more things that give you a more clear picture and kind of recontextualize the things that you learned at the beginning. I think that there were some things, like nothing was ever like so incredibly shocking to me to learn about these characters, but there were some things that made me look at other things in a different way. I thought that this book focused on really interesting details, both about the characters and about the atmosphere and the setting, though I don't think that it had the craziest, newest, freshest insights on like human behavior and interpersonal relationships, though that wasn't necessary. I just think like the characterization was done really well. I just wasn't thinking new things about these characters or the way they behaved. In terms of things that I didn't love about this book, there's this repeated doctor thing where she goes to this doctor and she has this like really intense and like overly earnest, sincere connection with him, and it made me think that Dawn Winter has never been to a doctor in her life, because that is just, not only is that not my experience, I would venture to say that that is almost no one's experience, where you go to the doctor and not only do you talk to him about things that are not like exactly explicitly relevant to your health situation and he listens, but then he returns in kind, talking about his own marriage and what's going on in his life and how he feels sad and hopeless in the same way that you do. It felt wildly unrealistic and out of place with how sincere it was. And I think that was very much not helped by the fact that the worst thing in this book is not the doctor. It, in terms of writing, is the dialogue. I think that the dialogue was really clipped. It's not written very well. There has no flow to it, and it's just not how people talk, and that was very evident in these doctor scenes. It's also extremely evident in this scene where there's a kid who is said to be 3 or 4 years old, and he talks like he's 2, at like max 2.5, and that is such a pet peeve of mine in books, where it's clear to me that authors don't have a ton of experience with children, and they don't really know how quickly children mature, especially in like the toddler range. Like typically with like I've known a lot of 3 and 4-year-olds in my life. Typically they speak in full sentences. They don't just say ball, daddy while sucking their thumb. And like there was no indication that there were any developmental delays with this toddler. Like, it was just clear to me that Dawn Winter doesn't know what a toddler talks like, what a 3-4-year-old talks like. I understand people having a problem with how neat and tidy this ending was, but I think it was okay. I would have preferred a mess, but I think that it fit in enough with the book, particularly because of those really earnest doctor scenes. I kind of felt that that was where this was going, that things were going to end up okay. I think this book could certainly benefit from more of a focus on Frances's substance reliance. It seems to be an important part of her life in the beginning, but then other things kind of take precedence, and I feel like that was a really important part of her character that I wanted to see explored more thoroughly. One of the things that I really hated in this book was that a point of Frances's disgust about Elaine is that Elaine is a lot bigger than petite little Frances. I think this is supposed to be a contrast again between Elaine and Adrian. Adrian is also a lot bigger than Frances, but I don't like the focus on Elaine's body being big and that being like so horrible and monstrous to Frances. I don't think it was an endorsement of that belief, but I think that it was really uncomfortable to read about, and I don't think it was really necessary for the story. Though I don't think that this book was perfect. There were points where I was reading it and thinking I might give this 5 stars. I didn't end up giving it 5 stars, but there are things that I really liked about this book. I was so interested in the characters, even though it is quite rambly and quite meandering. I found myself wanting to read it, like having trouble falling asleep because I was so interested in what was happening with them. And the desperation of Frances is so incredibly vivid throughout this whole thing that it's very hard to put down. I love it when shit just goes wrong with these people, and it just kept going wrong. I think at the same time, this book was fun and it was heartfelt, and it was dark and disturbing, and I think that's a great little mix, and that it was done like really quite well here, and I think I would recommend this. The next book I'm planning on reading is Dykette. I'm about 100 pages into it, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. You're going to have to wait about 2 seconds. Okay, hold your breath. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Dykette, a polarizing book that I both loved and hated, about some weird, kinky, dysfunctional lesbian couples vacationing for 10 days in the winter of 2019. In terms of plot and maybe character arcs as well, this book is a whole lot of nothing. I have very little to say, very little notes that I've taken about what happens in this book, because truly almost nothing happens until you're about 3/4 of the way in, and then it's like the most disturbing scene you've ever read in your life, and then it recovers from that pretty quickly, and then more nothing, and then it ends. And yet there was something so interesting about this. I think it does have a lot of insights, not necessarily insights that feel like they come out of a lot of reflection. It more feels like academia focused insights. I know this is kind of a work of autofiction, and you can tell that that was the place that this author was writing from when you're reading it. So I'll tell you what happens in it, but there's really not that much to say. These 2 younger lesbian couples go to stay at their friend's house in upstate New York over Christmas and New Year's in 2019. This older couple are like these established lesbians showing off their beautiful, successful lesbian lives. This is Jules and Miranda. The younger couples, we follow Sasha. She's like the protagonist here, and she is like the femme counterpart to her butch boyfriend, Jesse. I can remember their names. I just read it. And the other couple here is a little bit older than Jesse and Sasha, and this is Lou and Darcy. It jumps into this book by telling us that Jesse has a Grinch fetish, and Sasha is in the bathtub at Miranda and Jules' house trying to take a fucking nude with a Grinch filter on it. And then while she's trying to take this nude, she's overhearing Jesse in the other room having this therapy session talking about how he feels unloved in his relationship with her. And this does a great job of setting the scene for the raw and strange kinkiness and the relationship troubles that Jesse and Sasha are having for the rest of the book. This book is entirely about the dynamics between these 6 people and how Sasha feels in relation to them, and it's really the dynamics from Sasha's point of view. There's a lot of detailing the meals that they eat while they're staying at this house, Instagram posts, the clothes that everyone is wearing, and then in between that there's some like really potent insights on being a lesbian, being femme, being butch. Sasha spends this whole time fantasizing about and lusting over Jules, this older butch lesbian, and feeling really jealous about Darcy, who is planning this act of performance art collaborating with Jesse, and they're spending a lot of time alone together, and Sasha feels that her and Darcy are like rivals. Like they're both Eastern European femme lesbians, and she thinks that Darcy is just everything she is but better. After like 250 pages of truly nothing happening plot-wise, it's finally the night that Darcy and Jesse are doing this piece of performance art on Instagram Live. And this is when the book gets like disturbing and like way crazier than you really are expecting when you're reading this. They do this piece of performance art that involves Jesse stitching up, it's like a lesbian torture porn. It involves Jesse stitching up Darcy's mouth and then also her butt. It's honestly so out of the blue and so explicitly detailed and like stomach churning. It's hard to put down but also hard to read. This is the fastest paced point in this book, and part of you was like, is Jesse gonna fucking kill Darcy? But then that doesn't happen. This is all entirely consensual, and it's something that has been very meticulously planned by them, but it's not anything that anyone is expecting because they were planning it very much in secret. But Sasha and Jules have curled up in bed and watched this on Instagram Live. The two, Darcy and Jesse, are performing it in the sauna outside, and Sasha watches this piece, and in it, Jesse fingers Darcy until she orgasms, and Sasha is already really insecure and really jealous of the relationship that's been developing between Darcy and Jesse, and now Jesse has just taken it way too far. And so Sasha rebels by having sex, kind of like this like kind of clothed sex act with like a knee rubbing on a crotch with Jules. The last 50 pages of the book are mostly Jesse and Sasha fighting, and kind of everyone like losing it and not really wanting to be at this house anymore. Like what happens at the end of a 10-day vacation. Everyone's just kind of over it. Things devolve, but not really in an explosive or interesting way. It's just kind of more of the same relationship dynamics between these people. If you're one of those people who's like, I'm really into a book that's all vibes, no plot, I would recommend this. I am not one of those people, and so I did find it a little bit dull, but I also think that I can't say I enjoyed this book, but I respect this book for what it was, and I'm going to tell you why. Most importantly, this book is about lesbians, almost to a suffocating degree, and I have realized I read a lot of books with gay women in them, and very infrequently do I actually get like butch representation in novels that I read. This was not afraid to do that. This was not afraid to be about butch femme dynamics. It was so incredibly unpalatable for the way it dealt with queer sexuality and for who the characters were, and I respect that. I think that everybody else is taking the coward's way out, and this didn't do that. And did this make it a much harder book to read and to digest? Absolutely it did, but I think it was brave. Not only because this often goes into kind of academic tangents on gender and sociology and sexuality, but also because of the references. You can tell that Jenny Fran Davis is really well versed in queer, lesbian, and specifically butch media from the past. There are so many references, and it was like wonderful to see that this was really written following the literary lesbian tradition. There is shame and repression and identity, like all caps identity in this book. It's not just a book with two leads that happen to be women. And books with two leads that happen to be women absolutely have their place. I just think it's easier. I think that that is the easier route to take, and that this was just not cowardly. It was so courageous for what it did and for making it making itself a lot more difficult. Another way it did that is that it actually explored the gendered experience of lesbian existence in a way that I found to be really compelling. It was absolutely unapologetically lesbian, and that is why I had to give it 4 stars, even though at times I despised reading this, and at times I loved reading this. I think that it was doing something that other people aren't doing right now. This book explores themes of patheticness, of desire, of being the watcher or being the watched, of jealousy, of performance, of validation. And it explores all of this through a very tricky character of Sasha. She is difficult through the whole thing. And I think it is hard knowing that this is the author's self-insert, because I do feel that a lot of the time in this book, Sasha is portrayed not really through a reflective lens, or more so it doesn't seem like we're supposed to be seeing her in the light that it's impossible not to see her in. She can be just so hard, and I don't think that's true throughout the whole book. I think lots of times this book says, look at how wrong Sasha is, but I also think sometimes it says, isn't she in the right? And then she often is not. Sasha's really focused on reaffirming her high femme nature and the dynamic that she falls into with the people around her by performing this very hyper-specific kind of femininity. She just needs so much attention and validation and affirmation of her position in the lives of the people around her. She's incredibly insecure and incredibly needy and also very attention-starved, and she's always putting on this performance, and then no one is ever really noticing her. At times I found her to be a really interesting character, and at other times I found her to be really dull and one note. I think that this would have benefited from some more focus on the other characters here, though I understand that Sasha is incredibly self-centered, and that's why we don't really see much of like Lou, because Sasha has no jealousy about Lou or no fantasies about Lou, so Lou doesn't really exist in her mind as much. It took me a long time to start feeling compelled by Sasha, and I think that made it definitely drag more than it needed to through the first bit of the book. A lot of it at the beginning was just like so much information that often was meaningful. Even if it was just descriptions of what people were wearing, it did mean something, but it was like all this juicy gossip. This is a very like gossipy, messy book, and everything meant something, and you felt like you had to keep track of everything, and you didn't really get to know all that much about Sasha. There was an interesting thing with her character where there was this play between absolutely overt vulgar sexuality and then obvious repression. Like, she would often describe things, particularly in the first half of the book, as like sex centered. Like at one point it says the orifices of the car, that kind of thing. But then she calls her vagina her kitty cat, and she calls sex S. And there is clearly not the liberation that describing things in sexual terms is trying to like represent to the world. I think the main problem I had with this book is that I didn't know the other characters all that well. I only really knew them in relation to each other, and I understand that that served a purpose, but being a book that has very little plot and very little like character development, it's really just like the characterization and the stories of these people. I feel like I wanted a little bit more there. I didn't really ever understand why anyone was feeling how they felt other than Sasha, and Sasha is often kind of elusive with that. Like I don't really know why she is the way she is, and that was really a problem when this became mostly centered around Sasha and Jesse's relationship and this fight that they're having throughout the book. I don't know what these people are fighting about. I think that was the point. I don't think they really know what they're fighting about either. But by the end of it, I was like, can you guys just stop? So arguably they're fighting about Jesse having sex with Darcy on camera for this performance art. And Sasha says, you fucked her. And Jesse says, does it matter if I did or I didn't? Either way, I knew I'd be punished for it. You'd decide how it would be, just like it always is. What does that mean? Like, what are we talking about? I feel like it's like this argument that's almost in like therapy speak. I didn't mean that, Sasha said. Why did you say it then? I don't know. I'm sorry. That's the problem. You just say shit. You don't even mean it. You don't even care how it affects me. I didn't mean it. You're not selfish. I'm selfish. Why did you say it then? I didn't mean it. Why did you say it then? I don't want to live in a world where people say exactly what they mean. What are we talking about? It's like so crazy. I do think that that is intentional, though while I was reading it, I was thinking, what am I missing? What do I not know about lesbian arguments and like lesbian couple fights that this is what they're saying? What I'll say about this book is that this was a piece of work in the sense that it was a work of art, and also in the sense that it was a piece of work. I wouldn't say this was a fun read. I found it to be like honestly insufferable, but I did think it was worthwhile. I thought it was saying things, and I thought it was interesting, and there were some parts that were fun. It was tedious though, and that was the point, and I respect her for doing it, even though I'm happy to be done with it. The next book I'm reading is A Good Happy Girl by Marissa Higgins. I think is the title. I think is the author. I don't know. It's not right in front of me currently, and I will get back to you when I'm done with it. Goodbye. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about A Good Happy Girl by Marissa Higgins, a novel about a woman, a messed up woman, trying to deal with her traumatic childhood and her parents' incarceration through this throuple that she enters into, this toxic whirlwind romance between these two married women. The story begins with Helen going to meet up with these two women on their first date. They've been talking online for a while, but they've never actually met each other in person. And the whole time we're really inside her head, and she's alluding to this traumatic past and to the reason why her parents have been incarcerated, which you think at first is going to be this secret that's revealed later on. You get to know almost immediately that they have been imprisoned because of this shocking and horrific act of elder abuse and neglect on her grandma, her dad's mother, who's now in a care home. She was basically left to rot and die. There's another aspect to her childhood that's left a little bit more murky, and that is with her younger brother Ryan, who died when they were children. Her parents were addicts. They were in and out of prison for her whole life, and they were not good parents. She had a really horrible childhood, a really horrible adulthood with them, and she is still suffering the consequences of that very clearly in this book. She meets these two women, Catherine and Katrina, which, by the way, it did bother me the whole time how similar their names were, and I could not stop reading Katrina as Katarina because Catherine has an E before the R, and their names are almost always said beside each other because they're treated more as a unit than as two separate people. Though they do have their own personalities, there's not a lot of depth to them. So we mostly see them as the wives. So Catherine and Katrina are testing Helen, and Helen's kind of testing them too. They're playing games with each other. They're tricking each other. They're being kind of mean and mocking and threatening. They're pulling back and then giving. It's this really weird dynamic between the three of them, or more so between the two of them and Helen. The two of them do this thing where they'll lie to Helen to make her look dumb or other or separate or like different from them. They'll say things like, "What do you think my hair smells like? Vanilla or lavender?" And she'll be like, "Oh, I think it smells like vanilla." And they'll be like, "No, not vanilla." And they'll laugh and giggle at her and like keep these secrets and keep her on the outside. And she'll be like, "Oh, I guess it's lavender then." And they'll say, "No, it was lemon the whole time. It was neither of those choices." They do this to her quite often. They love to lie and they love to make her look stupid and silly. And this is something that Helen is seeking out. The cruelty is the point. She wants the cruelty. And she also wants, at the same time, these contrasting desires. She wants to be mothered. She wants to be loved and given care and kindness in sickness and in disaster. She wants to be fixed by these women and also torn down by them at the same time. While this intense relationship is getting going, she's also dealing with fielding calls from her father in prison. He's calling her and begging her to write him a character statement so that he can get paroled. And she doesn't want to do this. She wants him to stay in prison, not necessarily as a punishment, but because of her complex feelings about her childhood and about like his safety and his relationship to her. When he's in prison, she can be something that he needs. She can be a lifeline that he reaches out to. He doesn't really care about her when he's outside of prison. He mostly just calls her every once in a while, begging for money. So this is just another example in a long history of him using her when he needs her. And he offers to trade her information about her younger brother, Ryan, so that she will write a character statement for him. So she goes to the prison, and he doesn't really tell her anything. He kind of alludes to and mocks the fact that Ryan might have been gay. He died when he was like 5. So who fucking... He says his favorite color was purple. Though he hasn't really held up his end of the bargain, he's still insisting that she write this statement for him. And between flirting with her coworkers and having kind of weird sex with these wives, slacking off at work, and doing this foot camming thing, she's deciding whether or not she wants to hold up her end of the deal with her dad and write this statement for him, or if she wants to go on this trip upstate with the wives to visit Katrina's mom. She writes the letter, but then the next day she blows off this meeting that she's set up with her dad's lawyer to talk over the statement, and she goes upstate with the two wives. And while they're there in Katrina's childhood home, the two wives are sleeping, and Helen kind of confesses a whole bunch of things about her past and her current behaviors and feelings to them. She does this while they're asleep, and though this act of confession is not received by them, it is something that has still happened, and she's so mortified by this vulnerability that she has shown, even to not really any audience, that when they get home from this trip, she ghosts the wives, completely stops talking to them, and she ends up going out with her coworker Emma. And while she goes out with Emma, this entire book, she has been doing this foot camming thing on this app. She posts videos and photos and live streams of her feet, not for money. It's kind of just an attention and care thing. And she's been receiving messages on this app. She knows Katrina has found her here, and she thinks it's Katrina the whole time. And she learns that actually it's been Emma messaging her on this app. And also she learns that Emma has been looking at her foot camming videos on her work computer, has deleted all the evidence of it, but has learned that actually you need to talk to someone in IT to get the evidence fully deleted and that all their information is stored. And she's like, "Sorry, I hope nothing happens with your job because of this." And technically nothing does happen with Helen's job because of this. Something happens with her job. She gets put on probation because of the way she's been acting at her job. She's been taking advantage of the work from home policy and spending way too much time slacking off and not doing anything. And they say, you have to work in person from now on. And so instead of doing that, she completely blows it off and she abandons everything in her life. She really sinks into this really angry depression that she's been battling for the entire book. And in this depression, Catherine comes and visits her. It's been a couple of weeks since she's responded to either of the wives. And Catherine says, we're going out to Vermont for 3 months. And she says, will you come with us? And though Helen wants to go to Vermont, she also wants to make Catherine beg. And she also wants to reject Catherine's offer. And so she does. She says no. They get into a big fight and Catherine kind of storms out. And then a couple of weeks later, who shows up unannounced in Vermont but Helen? The wives accept her into their life in Vermont, though not without some punishment and without keeping her at arm's distance. And while she's here, she makes a smoothie with some elderberries she finds in the fridge that are uncooked, and they poison her. She gets really sick, and the wives care for her and nurse her back to health. And when she comes back into being like conscious and not just like vomiting everywhere, she listens to some voicemails on her phone from the prison and learns that her dad has made an attempt on his own life and he's in hospital. So she goes to visit him and she brings him an elderberry pie, an uncooked elderberry pie, poisonous, and she both uncuffs him with bobby pins. This is a premeditated act. When she's in the car, she asks the wives, hey, can I borrow some bobby pins? My hair feels a bit greasy, which doesn't track because her hair has just been washed by them. She goes into the prison and she manages to get him out of his cuffs, and at the same time, she poisons him. So she gives him an opportunity to escape, but she also makes him very sick. She leaves, and the 3 women go and visit her grandmother, and that is where the book ends. It's kind of a nothing burger ending. It's trying to be like a bleak and hopeful note at the same time, and it doesn't really do anything, and it's quite forgettable. There are some things that I liked about this book, and I'm going to talk about those first because I know that Marissa Higgins does not like when people review her book negatively or say anything bad about it, which is absolutely wild to me and makes me afraid because I have a lot of negative things to say about this book, enough that I feel like she's going to show up at my door. Reviews are not for the author. She should not be reading her own Goodreads reviews, and I get why she is. I understand why you would, and I feel like it's accepted that authors do that. What is not acceptable is going onto the internet and mocking the people who review your book poorly, who didn't like your book. And not only mocking, but doing it with this weird smugness that is hiding a very clear bitterness that people didn't think your book was perfect. It's not just the 1-star reviews. Like, I have seen her online being vicious about 3-star reviews. Like, girl, get a grip. In terms of characters, I liked Helen's unreliability and her self-destructive tendencies. I liked this contrast between the wants and desires and needs that she has. They don't fit in with each other, they don't make sense with each other, and yet they're there anyway. I think that was interesting. I thought that Helen, we spent too much time in her head. I think that she was supposed to be built up as this complex character, and we focused so much on her that it left everyone else feeling quite flat, particularly the wives. So much of this is dialogue with them and thinking about them and talking about them, and they fell really flat for me. I didn't think that they had a lot of depth outside of their existence as a unit. I wanted to see more from each of them, and even more from them as a unit. I didn't really understand their motivations or who they were as people, why they did the things they did. It didn't really make sense to me, and I wanted it to. Though with them, I did like these mocking and teasing, threatening tests that they were giving Helen, and I liked this push-pull between love and care and rejection and punishment. I enjoyed with Helen that there was this raw vulnerability in her thoughts, but not really in her actions. She keeps a lot to herself. She holds everything really close, but you as the reader get that vulnerability. Though I liked that Helen had these negative qualities, I thought that the book was so repetitive and heavy-handed with telling us her flaws. No show, all tell in this book. I also thought that it felt like Helen was approaching herself from this position that seemed to be an endorsement from the author, even though you can't really say that. It didn't seem to be necessarily like a deliberate reflection on this, where she seems to think that her own self-pitying recognition of herself as a bad person takes away her responsibility to change and grow. And that is something that I, as someone who at one point was 17, am familiar with. I think that's a really relatable feeling, but I don't think there is any reflection on that feeling in this book. It seems like it's okay. If she recognizes she's a bad person, she can keep making really selfish choices that hurt others and choices that hurt herself, that make her life worse, because she knows she's a bad person. One of the main things that I didn't like about this book was I thought it was trying too hard to be gross and weird, and it was failing at every opportunity to do so. It felt like this was written by someone who is an enjoyer, like myself, of the weird, fucked up, gay women genre of literature. And it felt like she had read those books and thought, I can do this too. But she didn't really grasp the heart of them, and that meant that it all fell so flat, and somehow her over-the-top attempts at being gross and weird kind of even just felt still vanilla and normal. Like, for example, there's so much talk in this book about feet and piss, and to me, it really read as someone being like, how can I be transgressive? What are, like, things that people think are like weird sex things? And all she could come up with was the most normal weird sex things of feet and piss. And like, it didn't even go anywhere with that. It just talked about it a bit, but very repetitively. I don't know. I thought it was really obvious that she didn't quite grasp the things that you need to do in a book to make that work. One of the few subtle things that this book does with Helen is this thing with food, particularly when she's like visiting someone who's older than her or has authority over her, like family members. She visits her dad in prison and she goes to the vending machine and she gets like armfuls, like so many of these shitty vending machine pies and brings them to him. She goes to her grandma and she brings her a whole bunch of like garbage gas station cakes, like this like junk food. And it really reads to me as the behaviors that a child would exhibit if their needs, particularly around food, weren't met. And I think that was done really well, especially coupled with this other thing she does where she kind of gorges on food, particularly in high stress situations. She eats and eats and eats until she's sick. It's not like a food, like an eating disorder, like bulimia kind of thing. It seems to be another connection to her traumatic childhood. There were a few choices that I liked with the writing, like how moody the tone was, kind of melodramatic. And she does this thing often where she makes these lists that aren't comma separated, which give them a kind of breathless and urgent feel. But on the whole, I thought that this book was incredibly overwritten and at the same time needed a proofread. It wasn't like the most mistakes I've seen in a book before, but I think the contrast between this really like over the top purple prose and ornate language and like having words missing or punctuation missing or words spelled wrong, it really makes it stand out how many mistakes are in here. And I thought that it was quite distracting. I also thought that despite being really overwritten and kind of pretentious with the language that it used, the sentence structure didn't vary enough. Like, it was so predictable how things were going to be written that by the middle of it, my eyes were just like glazing over and I had to really focus to gain any meaning from the sentences. I found myself continuously having to go back and reread things because it was so predictable how things were going to be written, like sentence level, that I just like could not pay attention. And that's not helped by the fact that this book is mostly words, mostly an author who can string together a beautiful sentence but doesn't really have any substance behind it or anything new or interesting to say. Even though this book does deal with really heavy topics and trauma and how it affects this narrator, it drew these way too clean lines between her traumatic childhood and her present day behaviors that it kind of was just like another way that it was heavy-handed, and it didn't feel like it had any insights into this human experience. Like, for example, her brother dies from getting sick as a kid, and throughout the whole book she's wanting to be cared for in sickness, something that she was deprived of as a kid. And she's always like having this cough, like faking this cough, playing up this cough. And that is something that keeps happening in this book, where it will give you a situation that she has experienced in her life, and it will show you very clearly how it has affected her. And it's not anything new. Like, it's not, I don't know. Sometimes a book can show you like, this is a way that this has affected a person, and it's something that you never would have thought of but made sense. These are all exactly what you would think. At the end of the day, I think A Good Happy Girl was fine. It was interesting enough. I read it pretty quickly, even though it could be kind of difficult to read because of the sentence structure. I don't think I'll ever think about this book again, and I think that there are hundreds of books that do this better. I think that you should probably read those books and don't waste your time on this, especially because the author is not going to be happy with you if you don't like it very much. So I'm posting this video in fear for my life, but I'm doing it anyway because I'm so brave. That's the end of the video. This was a pretty decent mix of books, but I kind of knew it was going to be because of the topic. I'm always looking for more recommendations on books that fit into this theme, so if you have them, please leave them below, and also come and join the book club. We're reading The Pisces by Melissa Broder this month, and I'm so fucking thrilled. It's my last Melissa Broder. If she doesn't write a new book soon, I think I might shrivel up and die. So come and talk to us about The Pisces. Join us on the Patreon, in the Discord, whatever you want to do. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.